Have you ever wondered how Hollywood's golden age gave rise to stars, only to tear them down just as quickly? The Hollywood studio system, a force that shaped the careers of countless actors, directors, and writers, was a double-edged sword. It built some of the biggest names in film, yet it also destroyed many of them, leaving their once bright careers in ruins. From controlling every aspect of an actor's life to pushing them to the brink of burnout, this system was both a launchpad and a trap. In this video, we'll dive into how the studio system not only created Hollywood icons, but also led to the downfall of others. Get ready to uncover the hidden stories behind the rise and fall of the stars who were caught in the web of Hollywood's most powerful machine. Beginnings, pre-1920s. The Hollywood studio system didn't appear overnight. Its origins can be traced back to the early 20th century when the American film industry was still in its infancy. During the 1910s, independent studios and small theaters were the driving forces behind the emerging film industry. However, as motion pictures grew in popularity, the demand for more organized ways to produce and distribute films grew as well. By the 1910s, filmmakers started to realize that making movies efficiently and consistently required a more structured approach. This led to the creation of large movie factories in Hollywood. These studios allowed producers, directors, and writers to work together in one place, creating films more quickly and on a larger scale. Hollywood was rapidly becoming the center of film production, and the idea of a studio system started to take shape. Around the same time, Thomas Edison played a key role in shaping the future of the industry. In 1908, he helped form the Motion Picture Patents Company, MPPC, which tried to control the film industry by owning the rights to key film equipment patents. The MPPC sought to create a monopoly over film production by limiting the freedom of independent filmmakers. They wanted to control which studios could produce movies and who could use the equipment needed to make them. Though the MPPC was eventually broken up in the 1910s, its influence helped lay the groundwork for the studio system that would dominate Hollywood for decades. This was the start of a new era in filmmaking, where power shifted from independent creators to major studios, changing the way movies were made forever. Formation of the Big Five and Little Three, 1920s, 1940s. By the 1920s, the Hollywood film industry had transformed into a well-organized machine, and a handful of powerful studios emerged to dominate the scene. These studios were known as the Big Five, and they included Paramount Pictures, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM, and RKO Radio Pictures. These studios controlled nearly every aspect of the filmmaking process, from production to distribution. They not only made films but also owned large theater chains, which allowed them to ensure their movies would be shown in theaters across the country. This dominance gave the Big Five almost total control over the industry, cementing their place as the major players in Hollywood. Alongside the Big Five, there were also the Little Three studios, Universal Pictures, Columbia Pictures, and United Artists. While these studios were still influential and played important roles in the industry, they did not have the same level of control as the Big Five. The Little Three were smaller, but still managed to produce successful films and maintain a loyal following. The studio system itself operated much like a factory. Stars, directors, writers, and even crew members were often bound by long-term contracts to the studios. This system meant that talent was essentially owned by the studios, which could control who worked on what projects and when. It allowed the studios to produce films quickly and consistently, ensuring they had a steady stream of movies to release. The factory-like nature of the system helped Hollywood maintain its grip on the American entertainment industry, with these studios leading the way. For many stars, directors, and writers, this meant a life of strict schedules and limited creative freedom, but it also meant steady work in a booming industry. Golden Age of Hollywood, 1930s, 1940s. The 1930s and 1940s are widely regarded as the Golden Age of Hollywood, a time when the studio system was at its most powerful and efficient. During this period, the major studios produced an impressive number of films every year. They were able to turn out movies at a rapid pace, thanks to the highly organized and factory-like nature of the studio system. This era saw the release of some of the most iconic films in American cinema, including Gone with the Wind, 1939, Casablanca, 1942, and The Wizard of Oz, 1939. These films became cultural touchstones, still beloved by audiences today. The studios, with their tight control over production and distribution, ensured a steady stream of movies that appealed to a wide range of moviegoers. During this time, the star system also reached its peak. The studio system not only controlled the careers of actors but also shaped their public images. Big-name stars like Clark Gable, Bette Davis, and Humphrey Bogart were carefully groomed and marketed by the studios, turning them into household names. These actors were often featured in multiple films, sometimes paired together, as studios saw the value in creating stars with mass appeal. These stars were not only part of the movies themselves, but were also key to the studio's marketing strategies. Studios carefully managed every aspect of their stars' lives, from their public appearances to their off-screen relationships, all to maintain a carefully crafted persona that would keep the audience interested and invested. The star system, combined with the studio's iron grip on production and distribution, created an entertainment industry that was both highly profitable and deeply influential, ensuring that Hollywood remained the epicenter of global cinema for decades. Challenges and antitrust actions, late 1940s. The late 1940s marked the beginning of the decline of Hollywood's studio system, and a key event that changed the landscape was the United States versus Paramount Pictures Inc. case, also known as the Paramount Decree of 1948. This landmark Supreme Court ruling was a direct challenge to the major studios' control over production, distribution, and exhibition. The court determined that the studio's practices created a monopoly, stifling competition and limiting opportunities for others in the industry. As a result, the major studios were forced to divest their theater chains, which were crucial to their power. This decision was a blow to the studio system, as it brought an end to the practice of block booking, where theaters were forced to buy a bundle of films, including undesirable ones, along with popular hits. With this rule no longer in place, independent filmmakers and smaller studios had a greater opportunity to compete in the market. This shift marked a dramatic change in Hollywood, leading to more creative freedom and a rise in the diversity of films being made. The big studios, no longer controlling every aspect of the industry, found their dominance weakening, paving the way for new players to enter the scene. Rise of television and shifting audience, 1950s. The 1950s brought another major challenge to the studio system: the rise of television. As televisions became more affordable and widespread in American homes, people started opting to stay in and watch TV rather than go out to the movies. This shift in audience behavior led to a decrease in theater attendance, and the studios, now facing increasing competition from television, had to adapt. In response, Hollywood experimented with new formats like widescreen and 3D to try to lure moviegoers back into theaters. These new technologies were meant to offer something different from what people could watch on their small TV screens, providing a larger-than-life movie experience that couldn't be replicated at home. At the same time, the power of the studios over their talent started to fade. Actors and directors, tired of long-term contracts and the strict control studios had over their careers, began to seek more freedom and creative control. The studio system's grip on talent loosened as more performers and filmmakers were able to work independently, further contributing to the breakdown of the traditional Hollywood model. By the end of the 1950s, the golden era of the studio system was coming to an end, giving way to a new era of filmmaking that was more diverse, innovative, and independent. The end of the studio system, 1960s. By the 1960s, the studio system that had once ruled Hollywood was officially dismantled. The major studios, which had previously controlled every aspect of the film industry, from production to distribution, had lost their monopolistic power. The Paramount Decree of 1948 and the rise of television had already weakened their control, and by the 1960s, the old system of long-term contracts and in-house production teams was no longer viable. Independent production companies began to rise, offering filmmakers and actors more freedom and creative control. Instead of being tied down to one studio, talent could now move freely between projects and studios. Freelance directors, writers, and actors became the norm, and they often sought out stories that were more personal and experimental, which led to the creation of films that were more diverse in style and content. The studios no longer had the same grip on the talent pool, which allowed for fresh voices and perspectives to emerge in Hollywood. This power shift also meant that Hollywood no longer relied on the studio system to churn out films. The production process became more flexible, with smaller budgets and fewer constraints. The major studios, although still influential, were no longer the giants they once were. Instead, a new era of filmmaking began, one that was less about mass production and more about artistic expression. The 1960s saw a revolution in Hollywood, as directors like Stanley Kubrick, Alfred Hitchcock, and Francis Ford Coppola led the charge in a new wave of cinema that would define the industry for decades to come. The lasting legacy of the studio system. Even though the studio system eventually fell apart, its influence continues to shape Hollywood today in several significant ways. The system's structure, which prioritized mass production, strict control over talent, and the creation of star personas, paved the way for many practices still seen in modern filmmaking. One of the most notable practices that the studio system left behind was the star system, where studios carefully crafted the public image of actors, transforming them into household names. While the system is no longer as dominant, the importance of star power remains central to marketing films. Today, movie studios, production companies, and even streaming platforms still rely on recognizable faces to draw audiences, much like the studios of the past. The studio system also pioneered genre specialization, a practice that defined the kinds of films produced by each major studio. For example, Warner Brothers was known for gangster films, while MGM was recognized for its lavish musicals. This practice gave studios a clear identity, making it easier for audiences to know what to expect. In today's film industry, while genres are more fluid, studios and streaming services still tend to focus on specific types of films. For instance, Disney is often associated with family-friendly animated films, while A24 has become known for its independent art house productions. The idea of genre specialization, born out of the studio era, still holds power in shaping the cinematic landscape. Another significant aspect of the studio system was mass production techniques. The studio's ability to produce dozens of films each year, with a team of directors, writers, actors, and technical staff all working under long-term contracts, allowed Hollywood to maintain a constant flow of content. This efficiency ensured that film studios had the resources and infrastructure to dominate the entertainment industry. Today, even though the traditional studio model is no longer dominant, the production processes still reflect the emphasis on output. Big-budget films are still produced on tight schedules, with highly organized teams working to ensure projects are completed on time and within budget. The collapse of the studio system in the 1960s opened the door to a more dynamic and creative industry. With the rise of New Hollywood, filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, and Francis Ford Coppola challenged the traditional storytelling methods established by the studios. They began exploring deeper, more complex narratives and experimented with new techniques in film direction, cinematography, and editing. The change also allowed for more independent filmmaking to flourish. Directors and actors gained more freedom to choose projects that aligned with their creative visions, unburdened by the long-term contracts and studio control that had previously shaped their careers. This created a more diverse range of films, with stories from different perspectives and innovative storytelling methods. The fall of the studio system also played a role in the democratization of filmmaking. With the old system's grip on talent and resources loosened, more independent filmmakers were able to gain access to the tools and platforms necessary to create and distribute their work. This led to the rise of independent cinema in the 1970s, a movement that changed the direction of Hollywood by introducing fresh voices, unconventional storytelling, and more risk-taking films. In today's world of streaming platforms, we see a modernized version of the studio model. Companies like Netflix, Amazon, and Disney Plus have become dominant players in the film industry, mirroring the studio system in many ways. They produce their films and retain control over distribution, much like the major studios of the past. These platforms focus heavily on creating a strong brand identity, with Netflix leaning into its global reach and Disney Plus capitalizing on its well-known franchises. In the same way that studios once used genre specialization to build their audience, streaming platforms now rely on data-driven strategies to tailor content to specific audience tastes, furthering the connection between past and present filmmaking practices. While the studio system no longer exists as it once did, its legacy is undeniable. It set the stage for both the creative freedom of New Hollywood and the content-driven approaches of today's streaming giants. The studio system may have ended, but its influence continues to shape how films are made, marketed, and consumed in the modern era. As we look at how the studio system shaped Hollywood, it's clear that its influence still lingers, even in today's era of streaming giants and independent filmmakers. But here's the big question. Has the shift away from the old studio model truly led to more creative freedom? Or has Hollywood just found a new way to control what we see? If you enjoyed diving into Hollywood's fascinating history and how it still impacts the films we watch today, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes insights into the magic of the movies. What part of Hollywood's legacy do you find the most intriguing? Let me know in the comments.